Aloha, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Holistic Life Mastery Podcast. I'm your host, Ronnie Landis, and also the founder of the Holistic Health Mastery online nutrition certification course. You can find more information on that at holistichealthmastery.com. So I want to welcome everyone to this episode, and this is another edition of our special remastered interview series. And for everyone that has not heard the last two interviews that we had up with Sacred Steve Adler and Wade Lightheart, I definitely want to recommend that you guys check those out as soon as you're able to. Absolutely phenomenal conversations. And these interviews were picked by me from an old podcast I had in 2013 called the Expanded Health and Human Potential Radio Show. And I thought before I unveiled all the new interviews with some of the world's leading experts, I wanted to bring some of these old archived interview audios for all of you guys, since I've had them archived on my own database and just waiting for the perfect time to showcase them for people. That's what we're doing here right now. And this interview is with a man named Shawn Stevenson. And by now you may have heard of him. He has his own podcast, a very, very successful podcast called the Shawn Stevenson Model radio show, I believe, or podcast. And at the time of this interview, he wasn't as well known. He had just came on my radar a little bit before we actually got together and did this recording. And he's just somebody that I've watched really skyrocket in the fields of health and nutrition, and someone that brings a lot to the table. And in this interview, we really go into some of the really taboo topics of digestion and elimination, and really go into depth on what's going on behind this whole gluten sensitivity, what's going on behind autoimmune conditions, and how it starts in your small intestine, your large and small intestines, and basically how certain foods are affecting your digestive environment, and how that can actually create a bedding ground for invasive organisms, and how some of that situation can open up the gates for what we call autoimmune conditions. And that's really powerful information that I had been looking at for years. But at the time of this interview, it was perfect timing for me to have this conversation with him, because I had been going through a little bit of fluctuation in my digestion and my elimination, and I was really seeking answers to some of the questions I had at this time. So Shawn actually came on at the perfect time and really provided some insight. And from this interview, I'm really happy to say, I was able to get some nuggets of information and insight that I've since applied into my strategy. And it's one of the reasons this topic has become such an expertise of mine, and I've shared with so many people over the years, is because of having a conversation like this and getting some aha moments and realizing the universality of it when it comes to what most people are dealing with in their health situation. So that's one of the things that we go into. We also talk about Shawn's journey from how he got started in the health crisis that he actually had to contend with that led him into becoming an inspired voice for this message. So I'm excited to share this interview with you. Without further ado, Mr. Shawn Stevenson. Enjoy. Hey everyone, this is Ronnie Landis, and I'm bringing you another edition of the Expanded Health and Human Potential Radio Show. So today's episode, I have a guest that I have the utmost respect for, and actually someone that I became aware of, I think maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, and It's someone that I wasn't aware of before, but I saw a TED video that he did on one of my favorite topics, which is chocolate. And I was just something about his charisma, something about the way he delivered the information just kind of struck a chord with me. And I've been checking him out, communicating with him here and there. And this gentleman is doing some amazing things in the field of health and nutrition, and has a holistic point of view, which is always appreciated from my end. He brings in all the components of health into one nice package, and I'm going to let him tell you more about that. So without further ado, I want to bring on Mr. Shawn Stevenson.
Hi, Ronnie. I really appreciate being on the show, man, and thank you so much for the appreciation and the gratitude. And man, I'm looking to deliver some great content for everybody today.
Yeah, right on. I have some interesting topics that I want to dive into and some insights that, I want to get some clarification on. I think will be really, really helpful for the viewing audience. So the first thing that I want to talk about, you have a really inspiring health path. What initiated you on this path? So let's get into that. How did you begin your health journey?
Well, it's that story, the hero's journey. I kind of got thrust into this unexpectedly, and I had no idea that my life was going to turn out this way. So I was in college at the time and looking at getting into business and finance, and my goal was to be, a CFO or something like that, something that I have no interest in whatsoever, but that's just what I thought I was supposed to do. And when I was 20 years old, I was playing football. I was an aspiring athlete, and everything seemed just great. And then seemingly overnight, I started to have a hard time walking. And I thought it was something to do with my hamstring, in my leg, but the pain just continued. And eventually I went to my doctor, and it was actually, I had a job, and it was a company doctor. And it was very strange that he had me going for an MRI when it was my leg. But, I did what he said. I went in and got my MRI done, and then I came back to see him. He put the MRI up for me to see, and he showed me my disc in my back were herniated and very, very degenerated. So he actually told me that I had a disease called degenerative disc disease. And so when he told me all this, it was like totally a different language to me at the time. And so I was used to working with my trainer, playing sports. So I was like, okay, so what do we do, doc? Let's fix this thing. And he kind of looked at me like I was just absurd. And he was just like, I'm sorry, son, there's nothing we can do for this. And it didn't register to my brain that he said that. So I asked him again. So I said, so should we change my diet? Should we change the way I'm exercising? So what do we need to do? And he said, look, son, you have the spine of an 80-year-old. There's really nothing we can do for this. We can manage it, and you might be a candidate for surgery in the near future, but right now, this is something that, this is just something you're going to have to live with. And in that moment, man, my whole world came crashing down, because up to that point, that day, I was just in pain all the time, and it was so absurd to me. So to make a long story a little bit shorter, I went through seeing 5 different doctors and getting their opinion, and I got the same feedback, bed rest, take this medication, wear a back brace, and just you gotta have to live with it. And so my world, even though looking back on it, I've kind of erased this word from my vocabulary, but I was depressed. I was definitely depressed looking back on it. And at the time, all I knew to do was what the doctor told me to do. So I laid around on my floor. I got really good playing video games, playing Madden and whatnot. But other than that, my whole life was really deteriorating around me. And it wasn't until one night when I was about to go to bed. And let me tell you, Ronnie, this was the last time that I can remember in my life I was taking medication. And this was about 13, 14 years ago. And I literally had to drug myself to be able to sleep, because the pain was so bad. If I just changed position while I was sleeping, the pain would wake me up. So it was this really bad sciatic pain would shoot down my leg. And it was really embarrassing, actually, because if I'd be walking on campus, sometimes I'd get that electric jolt, and it made me look like I had some nervous tic or something. And it was just, it was a bad time. So anyways, was about to take the medication. I sat on my bed, and I had this practice where I was asking unconsciously in my mind, why me? Why won't anybody help me? Why is this happening to me? And just creating more depression because of those questions. In that moment, I decided that I'm going to ask some empowering questions. And I don't know where it came from. So I asked, what is it that I need to do to heal myself? What is it that I need to do for this pain to be free out of my body once and for all? And I sat and I made a decision in that moment that I was not going to sit there and let my life be taken away from me because some doctors told me that this was my lot in life, that I was subject to a life of pain. And that night, some kind of, I don't really know how to explain it, but it was like some revelation happened, and I slept through the night without medication for the first time in 2 years. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned this, it was 2.5 years went by of this pain.
Wow.
And I woke up the next morning and put in place a plan. I set out to do a lot of the things they were telling me not to do. I set out to exercise, to change the way I was eating, and to just get back to living life again. And the funny thing is, in the very beginning, that first doctor told me it had nothing to do with what I was eating. I didn't have to change my diet, but he gave me pills to put into my mouth.
Right.
And the food was going in my mouth, but it had nothing to do with it. So it was just absurd. And so to make it really short, it took 6 weeks, Ronnie, and the pain was completely gone. It was as if nothing had ever happened. I had lost 30 pounds because just laying around, I had put on some weight, and I'm a naturally kind of thinner guy, but I had gotten up to around 200 pounds, and, I'm not super tall, so it's like a lot of my frame, so it's just, I was just very puffy and inflamed, and all that was gone. And Ronnie, a book had actually landed in my lap, and what's said is that when a student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Right.
And it was a book by Herman Ayara, and it's called Acid and Alkaline. And in that book, he specifically said, when you're in this state of acidosis, your body's going to start leaching calcium from your bones to aid in other processes. So your body needs calcium for your blood to clot, for example. That takes a priority over your bones.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Your body really works on a hierarchy. The most important jobs have to get done first. So your body could care less about you losing weight and losing fat if it's trying to deal with, some kind of cardiovascular disease, for example. Your body's going to take care of what it needs to first. So it said in the book specifically, when your body's in a state of acidosis, it will first pull the calcium from your hips and from your spine. And 2 years prior to my so-called injury and disease diagnosis, I'd actually broken a part of my hip just running track, doing a time trial. So both of those places had gotten hit, and nobody out there, none of these so-called experts had told me that this had something to do with my diet and being incredibly deficient in certain things. So from there, I changed my diet around quite a bit and focused more on the whole alkalinity aspect of diet. And, because of that, what I went through, people saw that and on campus, and people started to ask, Shawn, how did you do this? How did you change your body so quickly? And that's where my career began. People started asking me for help, and it felt so good to help other people when, oftentimes they've been given this diagnosis that they couldn't do it. And I'm walking, talking experience that you can be given a diagnosis that's so-called incurable, but that doesn't have the final say. That is not something that has to be your truth. And I'm a walking example of that. And it really resonates, I'm sure, and what connected with you and how I speak and the way that I carry myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an incredible story. It brings up a few things. You mentioned Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, which is an incredible theme in our world. And it brings up this point in relation to your story is that what's interesting to me is that, I've been an athlete all my life, and that's exactly how I got into this through a knee surgery. And for your situation, it was a very extreme debilitation where I'm curious if there was a cause, like obviously there's a nutritional and the acidosis cause, but I'm curious, like, is there's a bigger theme that I'm getting to with this. Is I'm curious of like what actually would have caused such a degenerative condition.
Great question. Okay, so there's two main aspects here, Ronnie. That's a fantastic question. The first aspect is your genetic weakness.
Yeah.
Okay, so your body, we all have some kind of predisposition genetic weaknesses, and when we're out of balance, things are going to go wrong there first. And I know that you're very versed in epigenetics, understanding that your genetics do not have the final say. It depends on your environment. You know, the environment internally and externally are going to determine whether or not certain genes get read. And I had very close genetic weakness for my bones and my tissues to start breaking down. My grandmother had very severe back problems, which I had no idea about until much later, as well as, you know, some other people in my family. So that was it. It was my genetic weakness. And so that's part one. Part two is our bodies are very complex, but yet very simple. It's just like building anything. You need the raw materials, you know? So if you're lacking the raw materials that your body actually needs to rebuild you, to actually build the tissues, to actually create the discs, you're going to be totally out to lunch. You're not going to have the ability to do it. Your body's going to be robbing Peter to pay Paul, trying to fix things, but it's not going to have the raw materials. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. So
for me, starting to understand this stuff much later, and I've been able to help so many people with chronic back issues. I mean, that's been one of my main things, you know, here in my clinic as well. So your discs in your back are non-vascular. Okay, so that means that blood and nutrition and hydration are not easily going there. They actually get into your disc through a process similar to like an osmosis process. Okay, so what's going on is this is the last place to get this kind of nutrition. So you have to literally like super hydrate yourself. First of all, I mean, those discs, that fluid, it's predominantly made of water. Your body changes it into some, you know, different substances and structure, but it's made of water. So I know I didn't have my water game up, which is so simple and so commonsensical now. But I might have drank, I don't know, maybe 2 glasses of water a day back then. And man, just to be straight with you, I was probably, and why I'm so good at what I do, I'm probably the worst ever as far as what I was eating.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
I didn't eat a salad, Ronnie, until I was 25. It was the first time I ever ate a salad.
I didn't even know what a vegetable was.
So it's all about ketchup and macaroni and cheese and pizza and fast food. And, you know, if broccoli snuck in, it had cheese on it, you know. So I was just not doing well as far as what I was providing my body as far as the raw materials. And once I switched over to focusing on real food and getting all this amazing nutrient-dense food in my body, it's just like this seeming magic happened. But my body was just thanking me for finally giving it the stuff it needed.
Yeah, we definitely have a parallel story there. And the second thought of my question was that, not necessarily a question, but it's an interesting idea, is that seeing where you are now and how you're such a big voice for health and for human potential. It's interesting how it started, because it's not something that it was kind of cumulative, you know what I mean? Where it's just kind of like, for me, it was just like aches and pains, and my stubborn self just kind of ignored it, and then it became a bigger problem. But in your case, it was this huge catalyst that actually caused you to reroute your life and to do what you're doing now.
Yeah, it was definitely a complete breakdown, for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting how the whatever word you want to use, the universe, the world kind of puts these things in our lap, and we have to contend with it, and by contending with it, we develop the skill sets to help other people do it. Yeah,
I feel that, you know, personally, I feel that I was a good vessel for this to come through, because I was so unassuming. I was a very quiet person. You know, a lot of people in school, even in college, if they would see me out somewhere and I would talk, people on multiple occasions would be like, "You talk?" I literally thought you didn't have a voice. Like, some people thought I was mute. because I wouldn't say anything.
Wow.
And so, but the thing is, the gift in that is I spent the majority of my life listening and really paying attention and watching people and noticing certain patterns and all these kind of things. So oftentimes my clients or people I work with would say that I'm intuitive, and I enjoy that word. However, for me, you know, with my man brain, I'm like, what does that really mean?
Right.
And the best definition that I've ever been presented with one of my dear friends is that intuition is really advanced pattern recognition. Okay. So I had that quality already instilled in me, and I just needed that breakdown to happen. I needed to have that breakdown to have a breakthrough. And something that Michael Beckwith said back in the day, and always stuck with me, was that God doesn't call the qualified, God qualifies the called.
Wow, that's phenomenal. That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, with all that said, let's jump into one of our key topics here. And I know it's something you're really interested in as of lately. And I'm going to be transparent right now for the time that we're on this call.
Right.
And this is going to, I think it's going to be helpful for people. And, you know, I'm very heavy in the raw food community, but also branching out into the holistic community. You know, you mentioned something about epigenetics, and as soon as you said it, Shawn, it just clicked in my head. I have been visiting with my parents before I go do this East Coast tour that I'm going to get off to do, and one thing I just started looking around the house, and there is nothing but congestion, like to the extreme, like beyond human, you know, imagination, unless you're seeing it. And I've been dealing the last couple of weeks or so. It's been like things have been feeling a little backed up, not really sure what's going on. And I'm looking around and I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. There must be something. I've been studying this for a while, but sometimes you're too close to the material.
Yes.
Someone else has to say it for it to click. And so the topic we're going to talk about right now is constipation.
Yeah, Ronnie, that's great.
And one thing I want to say and just hand it over to you is that what I'm really concerned about and what I'm feeling like is the biggest breakdown physiologically and psychologically for people in our society is what's called auto intoxication.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a huge issue. Ronnie, first of all, I have to, you are truly an advanced human being. You are a very evolved human being. Just to be at the place that you are, where people are looking to you, and to still say, you know what, I'm still a student and I still have questions. Because all of the great ones, myself included, we do that. You know, when it's time, you know, we reach out or we connect with other people, we ask our questions, and we get the feedback. That's what really makes the great people great. And so let's go ahead and dive into this topic. So I've had a ton of experience with this over the years. It was one of the first things that actually got presented to me. Now, my greatest teacher is my mother-in-law. This woman changed my life, and I mean, I love her so much. So I was 22 and a half when I had this whole revelation, and I got well from my so-called disease diagnosis when I was 20. When I was 24, I met my wife-to-be, and I met her mother. You know, so it was about a year and a half into this, and I was a strength conditioning coach at the time, and I thought I knew everything. You know, I was this guy working at the gym and working with all these people, and I was helping change people's lives. But honestly, Ronnie, at the time, it was like 50-50 with my clients being able to maintain the results they got. And so my mother-in-law, she actually studied at Ann Wigmore's Institute down in Puerto Rico.
Wow.
Okay, so I walk into the house and meet them for the first time. It's like wheatgrass trays and all this weirdness. And I'm like, what's up with your mom? You know, what is she talking about? And, you know, at the time, I couldn't really hear what she was talking about, nor was I really interested in it. But for whatever reason, she was really interested in me. And that's not normal for a mom to just automatically be interested in a guy that the daughter's dating. But she picked up that I was interested in helping people. So that's why she kind of positioned things. And she's very compassionate. You know, when you're talking to a guy a lot of the time, you can't tell us anything. You have to create you know what I'm saying? You have to create a situation to where we ask, you know. So that's what she did. She was very gentle and compassionate and patient. And she just created a situation where, I start to ask questions. So for me, Ronnie, even though I'd gotten well, I was still dealing with this asthma and occasional like hay fever every year. And one day I was really suffering, and I was almost at a point where I was going to go into the ER, because at night, people with hay fever, they know they experience this. At night it gets much worse, and you just want to knock yourself out so that you can wake up and feel better, and kind of like you're choking and trying to go to sleep, but you can't really breathe. So I was over at their house, and she was asking, so I heard something's going on with you. I was like, yeah, it's this weather. And she looked at me and she said, so is it something out there or is it something in you? And it just like blew my mind. Like it was like just totally just twisted up my thinking. Like, what am I talking about? It's something out here. It's something within me that's allowing this to take place. And for me, the big revelation was that, allergies were a sign of a toxic body. And so she put me onto this venture with cleansing and with juicing and all these wonderful things. So I have about 10 years experience with that. And ultimately, I seen some situations with, working with clients with different cancers and heart disease and diabetes and all these things. And these have been wonderful tools that I've been able to bring to the table. And I've seen some, just seemingly miracles happen on multiple occasions. So colon cleansing was one of the first things that got presented to me. So I started to study, because at that point I was a person who would really take the baton. Like, if you give me something, I'm going to find out to the nth degree how it works. So I started to study the digestive tract. And even though I spent an experiment of about 3.5 years, Ronnie, of just completely, there was no cheat for me. I was 100% raw food for 3.5 years. And I wanted to find out what that does. What is that going to do for my body? And some of the great things that I pulled away from that experience were starting to understand that, yes, getting all that wonderful vegetable matter through your digestive tract is awesome. However, there has to be a balance.
Right. And
this is where things really get very, very strange at, because people in our society tend to be very over acidic. Just the plethora of animal products, the grain products. You go to a fast food place and you get fries, that's acidic. You get the burger, that's acidic. The bread is acidic. And the soda, that's acidic. So it's just complete acidosis. So when people get onto this other way of being, we tend to get too far off into the other side of this alkalinity.
Absolutely.
And for me, it's like this yin and yang, and that's what that book presented me with, and that balance. So when someone's digestive tract starts to get off, and they're somebody who's more radiantly healthy, and they've experienced this peak health, and they've been focusing on juicing and herbs and all these awesome things, I look at first, okay, we're probably in a state where you might be actually, funny enough, too alkaline.
Alkalosis.
Yeah. So, and here's what's going on when we're moving through the digestive tract. So, okay, so let's go through the digestive tract really briefly, just simply. So you eat the food. Number one, you're chewing. The digestion starts even before it's in your mouth. Just even looking at food starts the stomach juices and all that whole thing. But then we'll talk about the physical aspect. You start chewing, and you're mixing that food with your information. Your DNA and RNA is in your saliva. It's kind of encoding that food. Your food is getting familiar with you before you swallow and it gets into your body. So that helps with assimilation, which is very important. So one of the first things also that she brought to my attention, my wonderful mother-in-law, was chewing my food. So I went from, I can go into a Denny's and be out in 10 minutes. And that includes sitting and ordering. Like I would slam the food and I'm out the door, to where just every time we ate, anywhere we ate, no matter what the occasion, Shawn is always the last one to finish by like an hour, So I'm sitting there with my food and it's just how it is. So we started to have to rearrange my life. Like we had to be at a movie, like make sure Shawn has enough time to eat. And that's just, I made it a priority, and it became comfortable and it felt good. It wasn't something I was forcing myself to do. So that's number one. Then we hit the esophagus, it gets down to your stomach, and your stomach should be like an inferno.
Yes.
You know, it should be like the hydrochloric, all the acids should just be hitting that stuff, because that is your number one means of protecting you from stowaways, from parasites, from unfriendly things to get into your body. Your stomach needs to hit that stuff up and kill stuff. Okay? So when we're bringing a lot of alkalinity into that environment, and not just into the stomach environment, but, you know, eventually it starts to change the way our blood is constructed and just changes our body overall, it can start to weaken those stomach juices, basically. So that's the other place. Then we move, basically, just to make this real simple, to small intestine, large intestine, colon. Small intestine, a lot of actions taking place. This is where all the real assimilation takes place. This is where your microvilli is located. And these are like these little finger-like substances that start to pull nutrients into your body. Because when we eat food, when you put stuff in your mouth, it's not actually in you yet. It's like a tube inside of you, you know, from your mouth to your anus. It's like this hose. And so the food doesn't actually get into you unless your body pulls it in. It allows it to come in and pulls it in. And so food particles need to be in a certain state for that to happen. And mainly like the amino acids, for example. Your body has had millions of years of evolution to be able to recognize amino acids and pull them in. What I've seen in my clinic, Ronnie, is that consistently people who are like on the standard American deal, they come into my office and they've had these crazy digestive disturbances for years, and they've seen all these experts and no one can help them, and I get them better within 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Because what I found is that there's a compound in a lot of grains, in particular in wheat, in breads, called lectins. All right, and these lectins have this very strange ability. It's like an anti-nutrient built into the plant to protect the plant. Okay, so because plants don't have legs, they can't get up and run from you, so they need protective mechanisms for themselves as well. So these lectins, they don't get broken down by our stomach juices. They get into our small intestine, and they have this strange ability to force their way, to bore their way through your intestinal wall and kind of break through your microvilli without them allowing them, like pulling them in. So they can push their way in and create gaps or holes. Like if you lace your fingers together and take a look at the inside of your hand, that's kind of how your small intestine is looking. So then you start to pull your fingers apart, and that's what starts to happen when you're introducing things like lectins into your gut. It starts to open up your gut wall, and that's something that's commonly known as leaky gut syndrome. All right, so not only are we creating a situation where dangerous foods and complete proteins can get in your body and eventually be causing things like autoimmune diseases, this is also tearing up your digestion in a very critical part as well. So I'm going to come back to that in 1 second, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
And can I talk a little bit about the autoimmune stuff?
Please,
real quick,
it's your platform.
Okay, so when you introduce, say for example, you've eaten a piece of bread, and you created this leaky gut situation. Not a piece of bread, but you've consistently been eating bread. Now, those complete proteins from that bread, or not complete proteins, but protein structures are in your bloodstream, and your body does not allow complete proteins just to be floating around. To your immune system, that's going to look like a virus or a parasite or some kind of nefarious substance that needs to go and kill. So it will go and attack it, and you would think that all is well then. I can eat my French toast and my donuts and I'm okay. But that's not how it works. Your body is very evolved and intelligent, so anything that looks similar to that structure that you just consumed, it will go and attack as well. So say the amino acid sequence, I'm just going to just make one up. The amino acid sequence from that bread compound is AABB, right? That's the building block. Those are the proteins. Now, so your immune system goes and destroys AABB. Now, the crazy thing is your thyroid might have some tissue or part of its structure that has AABBCC. Part of it looks like something it just killed. So your immune system will go and start to attack your own thyroid. And what that is right there, that's Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Yeah. So, and that can be for any part of your body, wherever your genetic weakness tends to be, your body can start to go and break you down. Asthma is an autoimmune disease. Rheumatoid arthritis. and the list goes on. And so many people are unaware that it's largely related to this leaky gut situation. And healing the gut is paramount in reversing autoimmune diseases. So I'm going to close that chapter now and come back to the gut. So small intestine gets damaged. Then we get into the large intestine and colon. And this is really your body's sewage treatment facility. So if things are problematic there, it's going to affect the whole system. And that's what we're talking about, the auto-intoxication. All right, because there are nerve endings in your colon that branch out through your entire body, even to your brain. So if you've got impacted waste in your colon or waste that's not moving, it's literally clogging up communication throughout your brain, to your heart, to the rest of your body. And, basically, you are what you eat. And you've heard this before, but your colon is a place where it's trying to pull in the last bits of nutrients that it can from the food you ate. But if it's stagnant there, then it's literally going to be eating the crap that's just been laying around in your colon. So it's going to be feeding you that crap. And this is why a lot of people that have auto-intoxication, they feel crappy, they think crappy thoughts, they talk a bunch of crap. It's just, but they don't know why. They can't really find a way to get out of it. It's just, they're full of it. Exactly. So now with all that said, we want to understand, okay, so our body is working from this top to bottom kind of function. Now, this is how I approach it when individuals are dealing with constipation. The first thing we look at is what's actually helping to form the waste that we need to move out. And that, in and of itself, is the bacteria that are in your body. Okay? So we need to have a wide range of healthy, friendly flora that's going to help our body to produce and create healthy poop, basically. All right? Mm-hmm. So now, by us getting into a state where we're too alkaline, when we talk acidophilus, acid, lactobacillus, so we're acid loving. So we need to have more of an acid environment, not all the time, but we need to be in balance. So for people to get those healthy flora into their body, there are a ton of ways to do this, but it's still going to come back to the diet to support it, Ronnie. So number one, obviously, I'm going to go with food first. So looking at traditional cultured foods, cultured vegetables, sauerkraut, kimchi, natto, and I'm not a big fan of soy fermented things, but they can be helpful for some people. So the miso, cultured things like kefir is becoming much more popular now. Coconut water kefir, coconut yogurt, or if you're doing milk, so raw milk, you can make kefir out of that as well. And that's been used for a long, long time. It's really going to depend on the person, Ronnie. It's not going to be a silver bullet, but somebody's going to have to experiment and find out what's going to help them have that good belly, what's going to have them help them have that good feeling or good gut environment with the bacteria that they consume. So then we look to, okay, now what about the probiotic supplements? Well, I've experimented with so many of them. I really like Dr. O'Hara's probiotics. I remember I was out there in LA back in the day, Beverly Hills, Irvine, and that's where I first saw them. And it's just like, what? These are like $80. It's crazy. I was like, it must be worth it. So I started to use them. Of course, they're much less expensive now, but they have an actual, it takes 3 years fermentation process to make them. It's a very conscientious process to make those capsules. And so I found that across the board, it's helped a lot of people, not for everybody again, so you can experiment with the probiotics and whatnot too, but your best idea is going to be with food. And then we have to look at the diet that supports it. So now we talk about prebiotics. Now, if somebody's consuming far too many vegetables, which sounds crazy, they can get into a state of, being too alkaline. So we want to make sure that we're getting some acid-forming foods in there. And it depends on your genetics. It depends on your beliefs. It depends on a lot of different factors. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to be that person that just tells everybody, do this, do that, do that. But in my experience, everybody's so unique, but there's these categories of things that we can experiment with. So I would look at, okay, am I getting a nice amount of more acid type of food? So, the nuts and seeds are going to be okay, like for people with a vegan and vegetarian approach, for people who are doing more of an indigenous type of diet strategy, or just looking at what their ancestors ate. Like my wife and my mother-in-law from Kenya, from Africa, so they're very close to hunter-gatherers. So having those animal foods is just a part of their culture, and it's something that they have a long history of doing. Even though the raw foods has been a huge component of their health, just having those small amounts of animal foods have been very helpful with keeping them healthy, generally as applied to them. So we want to be in balance here. You want to have the right ratio and not go too crazy with the juicing and the smoothies and all this kind of things. So, Ronnie, the last thing I'm going to mention really quickly, because I know I went multiple directions here, is in my 3.5 years of just doing 100% raw living foods, when I started to eat more cooked foods, when I incorporated a few animal products into my diet, I found that my digestion was extremely weak. Yeah. And it was a result of me having exclusively, because honestly, Ronnie, I felt the best. I felt so good when I was just on that, much lighter, when I was just having juice and having liquid nutrition, basically having smoothies. So, and elixirs and things like that. So, but when I started to eat more whole foods, real foods again, I mean, it was really hard for me. It was hard for my digestion, and things had to switch over. It took a time for everything to switch over and get strong again. And for some people, what I might say there is you might need to add in some betaine, so betaine hydrochloride, so taking a supplement, or just some enzymes generally are going to be helpful, but something to help to strengthen that digestive firepower. And the betaine hydrochloride, which one do I use? Super enzymes from Now Foods. I like them. They also have the ox bile in there. And so that's going to help to increase the heat. And what I would recommend is start off with 2 and then see if you feel the warmth when you're eating in your stomach or shortly thereafter. And if you don't, then chances are your digestive firepower is a little bit weak. So try 3, try 4, keep adding them in until you feel that warmth. And for me, it took me up to like 6 or 7. And finally was like, okay, now I know what it feels like to feel that warmth and digestion again. Yeah. But it doesn't, the funny thing is it doesn't create a dependency. It starts to kind of remind your body to produce that stuff. So I was able to ratchet back, and now I don't really need them. I might have them occasionally if I go out to eat or something like that. But, getting that digestive firepower stronger in the stomach first before it gets to the rest of the machine. Because oftentimes we focus on the colon, and people start looking at, I need to do colon hydrotherapy, keep flushing, but that can be helpful. But at the same time, that's not how your digestive system normally works. We need to go from the top down, so it starts with chewing your food well and then getting that strong digestion again.
Yeah, I feel like in a lot of ways this was a personal consultation because so interestingly enough, I've been through the different layers of this conversation. I've been through the massive enzymatic supplementation. I mean, like high quality enzymes too. And I've been through the HCl and actually the Now product you just mentioned to me. I did that years ago and it made a massive effect. But then you just triggered that in me again. But this other one that I was using isn't doing anything.
Yeah.
And this is such a key conversation for myself and for the viewers because what I think happens is obviously the alkalosis conversation comes in. I've seen this with like overabundance of alkaline water and in a way denaturing the natural production of acids. One of the things in the raw food field, and I've said this for years too, is like things like celery helps you promote more hydrochloric acid because of the natural salts. But there's also the intense alkalinity of it too. So I feel like there's this kind of, you're playing this like tightrope game. Yeah. And at the end of this thought is just reaffirming what you said is that, raw food is the blueprint. And from my perspective, it's the blueprint for human nutrition. I don't think there's any denying that as much as some people like to try. I think that's really what we're designed to eat primarily, but then there's the other condiments, if you will. There's the other attributes that are important for the homeostasis or the balance point. You know, it's like, what are we gonna? And this is going to be the next topic I wanna dive into you with is how can we achieve with all the dietary philosophies, ideologies, and all the different perspectives out there that seem to be kind of like in many cases can be kind of extreme and not really accessible over the long term. How can we develop a homeostasis within our day-to-day life?
Ronnie, that's an amazing question. And what I feel it really boils down to is something that's so far out of reach for people, seemingly, but it's the most intimate thing that we can possibly do, which is to honestly listen to your body, to honestly listen.
Yeah.
So oftentimes, because we get into a religious dogma about our diet, we fail to actually pay attention to those signs and signals from our bodies that, hey, something is not right here. Something is off, and we need to consider that maybe my idea about what I should be eating could possibly be a little bit off, and just consider exploring it. And don't get so far into our religiosity that we start to hurt ourselves. So that's what I really feel it boils down to, is first and foremost listening to our body. And honestly, at this point, I really feel that I've brought the best of all these worlds together. And for a time period, especially while I was really focused on the raw food, I would attract more clients at the time who it was really extremely helpful for, but there were still some people that I couldn't help. Now my success rates are just off the charts because I have all these tools to pull from. And I still juice, I still make my elixirs, I still do so many amazing things, but for me, I'm just so much more in balance by having the other things that help to create homeostasis for me personally, which is going to be different for each person. And, so I'm a big believer in raw food and raw food nutrition, superfood nutrition as a reset. It helps to reset everything, But at that point, oftentimes we cannot live there, because if we don't live in the ideal, just even the conditions we live in. I did that in Missouri, in St. Louis, Missouri, where the winters are brutal, the summers are brutal. But, so I'm going through 3 years, 3+ years of winters here, having this cold food, and the thing is, I was so passionate and focused on what I was doing. There was no other option. But it was one of those winters. It was that final straw for me. It's actually when my wife was pregnant with our son, where things started to change. I really started to look at, okay, I'm running this experiment for myself, but do we want to run this experiment for our kid? Because things were not feeling, I wasn't paying attention as much to how I was feeling versus my ideas.
Yeah.
And so what I began to do was kind of start to break down those barriers I had in my mind, and gave myself permission to experiment and try some of the things that I told myself were off limits. And for me, Ronnie, the first two years that I was 100% living foods, I felt like nobody could tell me anything.
It's like those 2 years, yeah.
Yeah, I felt so good all the time. I required very little sleep. I was just crushing it. I was just at this amazing state. And after that, things started, like the wheels started to fall off. And I'm very diligent about experimenting and finding other ways of fixing this thing, this issue I'm having. And I tried. People say they try everything. I literally tried like everything. Now I remember being at a Raw Spirit Fest. Maybe it was in 2007, maybe 2006, and I heard Dr. James Sheridan speak.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was full on raw food, and I was locked in, and maybe it was like 6 months for me or something. I might have these dates off a little bit, and he was talking, and he said, he believes that 100% is not ideal. Mm-hmm. And he said that, for him, 80% is going to be ideal, and change season to season. And I heard this guy with all this experience and working with all these people, and I was just like, he's doing it wrong. It should be.
That's always the comeback.
Right. So I'm doing 100%, and I'm feeling great. This guy, he just doesn't know his stuff. And lo and behold, I reached that threshold, and things began to change for me. So basically, Ronnie, what I'm saying is homeostasis, bottom line, for every person is going to be different. And I really want to call out to everybody to just allow yourself to listen to your body. Okay, not the images that you see on the internet, not the stuff you hear about on TV. And if all else fails, look to what your ancestors ate, your closest ancestors, because honestly, man, I feel that we don't have any idea where this whole story actually got started.
Yeah.
We don't have any idea what the perfect human food is. Humans have tried to eat everything, for sure. And what we do have to rely on is what our ancestors have shared and carried on through the generations. And those are kind of our safest bets, But then, Ronnie, people like you and I, and people that your community is full of, are people that are looking at like, okay, so what's the next level?
Exactly.
Let's get to that. Well, let's talk about that. Let's start this conversation. And it starts with, first, we can't get to the next level until we're fully grounded in this level. You understand? We've got to get grounded here. We have to fully descend into this body and get this thing strong and just in flow. But and that's different from being in that high I was in.
Yeah.
Because, I can be now it's this amazing balance. I still have that connection, but I'm much more grounded. I feel rooted. I feel strong and solid. And now from here, I'm at a place where I can say, okay, now let's start this ascension.
That is so beautifully put, and that's really exactly where I'm at in this whole thing. And it's interesting because I was talking to Dr. Sheridan a while back in LA, and we had that same conversation. And I've heard him speak many times at different places, and I've heard that, and I always felt like the same kind of little resistance, but at the same time I knew he was kind of right. Yeah. Yeah, it's just a very interesting conversation to have. I want to ask you too. What are some of those? Because there's the whole. Then this opens up the door for someone like me, where there's this whole other conversation going on like no grains, the grainless diet, grain damage, and now I just saw an article which I fundamentally disagree with, but I just saw an article whoever wrote referring to like the paleo diet, and it was talking about quinoa, which is coated with a type of saponin, and talking about how it makes insertions in your gut, leaky gut syndrome, and this and that. And I'm just like, okay, so where do we go with all that?
Right. I was right there when quinoa first started to hit the store shelves and start to get popular. And I actually mentioned it in my book too as one of these superfoods. But it really comes back again to our genetics. It comes back to what feels good for us. True, there are some saponins in there, and there are saponins that are helpful, and there are some that are harmful. But it just depends on you. A lot of people like quinoa is awesome for them. We can't just go and throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yeah. That's what I got that from James Sheridan.
Yeah.
We can't do that just because, there's this, we found this thing here. And it's just people trying to justify their beliefs. They're trying to justify that all grains are bad.
Yeah.
And like, okay, we found this thing in this grain and it's bad for you. Right. When that's not necessarily true. There are, and even when I'm talking about wheat, you have to use your better judgment and understand, like, wheat is a wild, like, there's a whole plethora of different wheats that we can be talking about. But the wheat that we have today, the stuff that people are eating, is not like what was in the biblical days, for sure. We know that. This is genetically modified dwarf wheat that will tear you up, for most people. And I was there when, like, I was shopping at Whole Foods, 11 years ago or whatever. But in my area, in the Midwest, we tend to be like a little bit later when we pick stuff up. So I would shop there with, I was the only person in the store and be like me and some random old guy, we're like, hey, what's up? And there weren't people there. Now it's packed, just packed full of people. And I started to see like these gluten-free things back then. I was like, oh, that's interesting. What's the deal with this gluten thing? And man, lo and behold, people have been suffering by their exposure to these foods for so long, and now all of a sudden it's popular. Like, oh, everybody has a gluten sensitivity.
It's a trend now.
You know, whereas the question is, was it not a problem before? You know, we don't need to have tests done to find out, like, this food is causing me a problem. Just eat the food and notice how you feel. Pull the food out and notice how you feel. You know, if you stop eating grains for 2 weeks and you get rid of like 10 pounds and you're not puffy anymore and your stomach isn't bloated, then yeah, I think that was a good idea to pull that out. So, Ronnie, one other thing that I want to mention is, you know, so we talked about the probiotics. So the gut, the bacteria in your gut are really going to determine, they're forming and creating that poop. You know, they're really going to determine what your poop is going to be doing, you know, so that's a big indicator of what's going on with the bacteria. Now, as far as the functionality of the system, there's also an emotional component. Mm-hmm. You know, we got to talk about that. And then there's also, you know, the stress component. And then there's also the right food component, which is an additional stressor. So we want to make sure that we have the ideal foods coming through. And that's where the experimentation comes from. You know, so again, for some people, this is going to sound way off the mark. And I just hope that you appreciate and respect that I'm coming from a place of compassion. And please have compassion on me. But I was one of those staunch believers that, you know, eating some meat will back you up. I mean, it will completely clog you up, right? And I would just go around talking about how it stays in your gut all this time. And, you know, for some people, that's just not true. It's just not true. You know, the Eskimos, for example, that's all they eat. And they have regular bowel movements. It's just, it really depends on the bacteria first. And then eating the right foods that agree with your genetics and what's going on with your unique experience here on the planet. So if eating a little bit of animal foods is going to actually help your digestion, I know it sounds crazy, but it might be something to look into. But on the other side, and I'm just going to close that chapter and let's just put that off to the side, plant the seed and see what happens. But on the other side, let's look at having the right type of roughage coming through. It might not be like vegetable roughage that does it for some people. It might be the ground chia or the ground flax, or it might be certain things that are coming from particular fruits that actually help them with their digestion. You know, we gotta experiment and move stuff around. Because for me personally, I'll just tell you, like, eating a lot of salads in my life, and I've subsisted on salads for quite a long time, that doesn't have the ideal digestive effects for me. Yeah. For me personally, if I toss 2 big tablespoons of ground flax into my shake, that helps to really keep me regular and keep everything feeling good. You know, just that one little thing does it for me. It really helps out a lot. And, you know, for some people, it might be the type of fiber that's found in maybe yams or sweet potatoes, for example. There's so many things that we're so different. We have to have the ability, again, and I'm just going to come back and say this, to experiment, not be bound by religious thinking about our diet, and do what is best for us so that we can, if vegetarian or veganism is your mission here on the planet, you have to be healthy first. Absolutely. To go spread that. And Einstein said that we can evolve to a vegetarian diet. You know, it's going to be the best thing for our planet. Yeah. He didn't say do it now. We have to be healthy first and figure this whole thing out, and gradually even maybe changing our genetics and moving towards that way, because, you know, you understand what I'm saying, Ronnie?
Totally. And I know that quote very intimately. It's in my book. And, you know, what you just said was so paramount, and I never really looked into it deeper. And I know you're that kind of person, and it's actually inspiring me to actually not generalize. Like, I'm not really one of those kind of religiosity type of people, but sometimes there's so much information coming that I'll try to encapsulate it. And, you know, I don't have, you know, sometimes you don't want to have to, like, take the time to isolate certain things to really, you know, what's the real meaning going on in there. And what you said about Albert Einstein's quote about evolving to a vegetarian diet was very key, because I think that's where it's going, and that's my message to people is, like, move towards it. Don't be dominated by it, but just allow it to move towards it and see where it takes you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm still kind of like tingling off that is that is the crux of the matter right there, is that there is no rules, there is no ideal framework, and like you mentioned earlier, and this is something I've been saying too, is that all the evolutionary theories and all that stuff on, you know, where we came from, what kind of food we're eating, that's all made up. Yeah. So I mean, we only have a, you know, not to go off on that tangent, but basically the idea is just reinforcing everything you said, man. It's so brilliantly stated, is that, you know, how does this feel in your body, and that natural high that you get on living foods, on superfoods, on herbs, that to me is just to allow you the experience to feel better. You know, people don't do well because they don't feel well. So now that you have that experience of feeling a new zest for life, you have to reintegrate it back into the body. You know, the physiology of it all.
Yeah, and this goes back to even in our religious teachings, in our religious books, is, you know, not to be judgmental, and we want to really guard that for ourselves. You know, really look at, when I'm putting this food into my body that I'm experimenting with, am I judging myself? Because that's gonna change that experience for you right there in and of itself, because your mind is incredibly powerful. It can turn your food into poison. Yeah. You know, so doing it, when I say really feel how things feel in your body, I'm also talking about doing it from a non-judgmental place, allowing it to for your body to communicate and come into interaction with this without your judgment. You know, that's very, very important, because somebody might be like, well, I tried this, you know, I just saw one of the Raw Bras, they were talking about colostrum the other day, you know, and, you know, we were emailing back and forth or whatever, and I clicked on one of his videos, and he was talking about colostrum. So somebody might try and be like, you know, well, it didn't make me feel this or that, you know, who didn't believe in it in the first place and actually was against it. Yeah. Rather than just feeling it, which it might be something that's problematic for you, you know, if you have these, if it doesn't really resonate with your body. But again, to bring up my family, you know, my close family, my wife and my beautiful mother-in-law, in Kenya, colostrum was like, that was the deal. That was like their fermented thing. They would actually take that and it would be this fermented drink, you know, and it was just like, there was none of these diseases of civilization that people have here. I mean, her grandmother lived to be like, I don't know, 90 something or whatever, out and just like making food every day, and, you know, just like no health problems at all, you know. And that's kind of commonly seen, but then there's parts of the culture who were doing the new things and drinking the Coca-Cola and all that, the stuff, trying to be like, you know, Americans and whatnot. But it really goes back to, you know, what's right for you. So doing it from a non-judgmental place is really, I feel that's enlightenment. A big component
lightening up.
Yeah.
That's so key. I did an interview with my good friend Steve Adler. He owns Sacred Chocolate, and he said we were talking about the same thing, because I was like, why? You know, what's your perspective on all this anti-cacao nonsense? And he's like, the reason all that takes place is because people are so wound up in their head, they're out of their heart. And he said the only sin of a child of God is judgment.
Wow.
And I was like, and
Sacred
Steve, yeah. And ever since then, every day, I'm like, no judgment. Like, this whole judgment thing is erroneous.
Yeah, I have to agree with him. That's beautifully said.
Yeah. Well, I am so glad that I got you on the call today. This was phenomenal. You gave me some new tips and ideas, that just a new way to look at it, to scope it out, and I think this is going to be really helpful for a lot of people. So thank you so much. Where can people get a hold of you?
Well, we've got an amazing site. It's not a website. I tell people it's not a website. It's an experience.
Yeah.
Over at my site, it's the ShawnStevensonModel.com, or just to make it short, the SS, which is my initials, the SSModel.com. And we've got my show over there, which is doing great. We were top 80 in iTunes for health last week. We've got tons of free articles and videos and just really awesome stuff that, I put my heart and soul into to really help people. And there's something there for everybody, so that's where people can connect with me and check out my work.
Right on. And you are also, your clinic, I assume, is the Advanced Integrative Health Alliance?
Yep. So we're here in St. Louis, Missouri, and I still do work with patients a lot less than I used to, because I'm really focusing on teaching teachers, really getting the leaders to step up.
Nice.
And getting this information in their hands. And that's what I'm really passionate about. But I still love that one-on-one and working with people and getting them from, the place that they are currently at to where they know and deserve to really be. So.
Okay, right on. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ronnie.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. This was another edition of the Expanded Health and Human Potential radio show with our guest, Shawn Stevenson, a wealth of knowledge and insight. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will catch you guys next time.